Okay, here we are, Module 10, D-Day, June 6th, 1944, codename Operation Overlord. This is indeed what is used to refer to the Allied attempt, Allied as in mainly United States and Great Britain and Canada, invasion of what was known as Fortress Europe, where Hitler and the German army had occupied France. Now, on this map, which you'll see again, you can see all of the different locations of the different task forces that sailed from different spots in England, met in the English Channel, and then made their way to the French coast in this effort to attack Germany. Of course, to make certain you know, you see England in blue, and then you go across the English Channel, and all the cities in red are in France, which is where the Germans were. Now, on this map you see the Soviet Union on the right and the Allies on the left. Allies as in Great Britain. And the United States was there too, because we had air bases there and we had lots and lots of army soldiers that were getting ready for this invasion. It is true that Joseph Stalin had been asking for quite some time for us to open up what was known as the Second Front. The first front being where he was fighting the Germans. The Soviet army was fighting the Germans. That was back in the east, where you see the Soviet Union in red on the map. Now, he wanted us to make a major attack, not just small little attacks, but a major attack, in order to keep Germany fighting from different directions, which would, of course, help to defeat them more quickly. Now, this meant an attack in occupied France. Now, yes, France had split up. France had been split up. You see, the pink part was called the occupied zone. That was a part controlled directly by the Germans. And the blue part, Vichy France, was called the free zone. They weren't exactly totally free, but they had some control. So the idea was to attack the Germans where they were and begin to push them out. The key was, where were the Allies going to attack? Now, of course, conventional thinking would have had them attacking in the clearest, most easily reachable, shortest place you could go, which was where you see the red arrow pointing to, called the Pas de Calais. At that spot, it was only about 21 to 22 miles apart. Now, was it just because of Joseph Stalin that we did this? No. Everyone knew that if we didn't, like we've already mentioned, force them, Germany, to fight from two directions at once, it would be very difficult to defeat them. Soviet Union in red, and the Allies over on this side. And so here once again you see that map. We had to cross the English Channel, which was deep water. We had to have a whole lot of boats meet up and go in an organized fashion across the English Channel to the assigned beaches. Now you see the beaches in blue labeled Gold, Juno, and Sword in France. Those were the beaches that were going to be attacked by the British and the Canadians. The ones in greenish color, Utah and Omaha, those were the beaches that are going to be attacked by the Americans. And you can look at the map of England and see exactly how far broken up all these forces were. You might think, why do they do that? Well, when you stop and you think how many hundreds of thousands of men it was, you had to split them up like that. What would they face when they got there? Well, strong forts on the coast, made specifically for this purpose, to defend against attacks. You'd also see, as you see in the picture on the right, obstacles in the water that when it was a high tide they'd be just underwater, so if a boat carrying troops came in it could rip the bottom of them out. And you also see that tipped on the top of some of these logs, you see it in both the picture on the upper right and the picture on the bottom left, you would have mines, explosive devices strapped to the top of them, so if a boat again floated into it, it wouldn't just rip the bottom out, it would explode. We had a lot of deception to make them guess where we're going to attack. That spot that was closest, all the way up there in northern part at the Pas de Calais, we floated rumors that there was a new army being formed by a very famous U.S. general, General George Patton. Well, there wasn't really an army like that, but how do we make them think there was one organizing there? Well, we used inflatable weapons, a blow-up plane, a blow-up troop boat, a blow-up tank. You can see the man holding the tank up in the air, so obviously it's not a real tank. But from airplanes high up in the air, who could tell? So we used deception to make them think we were going to attack one place and we really had planned to attack down below where you've seen that map already. What was needed to attack? A lot. Over 2 million men were preparing to participate, Allied men. It was estimated that just for the first 6 months, they need over 215,000 vehicles, as in motor vehicles, and about 33,000 planes. You see the pictures of the tanks and the field cannons there, lined up, as they say, hub to hub, meaning there's not much room, we got to get it all in if we can. And here are the men who went in first. The first troops to start the invasion of Hitler's fortress here at about 1 o'clock in the morning on June 6. After the attack had been delayed because of bad weather, they sent in our airborne troops. Now their job was to jump behind enemy lines, create confusion, attack from different directions, and try to take out some of the cannons that were miles behind the front line that would be firing at our boats as they came in. Many of these men had never been in contact before, but if you look at both pictures and you look at the facial expressions, there's a real mix. In some instances you see bemusement, almost smiling. In other cases you see just staring. In the case of the guy who is first in line getting ready to jump on the left, you see kind of like a determined look. Now those men have hooked up their parachute hooks to the cable that when they leap out of the plane it will automatically pop their parachute. The chute that you see on the front of them, on their bellies, those are just the emergency chutes. You also see that gentleman on the left was carrying a bunch of equipment. Unfortunately, when they actually jumped out, these planes were going too fast because they were trying to avoid being shot down by the Germans. So a lot of this equipment was, because the planes were going so fast, was ripped right off their bodies. So a lot of them went into battle just with the rifle they were holding. And there you see some more pictures. The top one on the left is, again, of men in a plane. The one right below that on the bottom left is a movie version of what it might have looked like when all these parachutes were coming down with all these men jumping out of the planes behind German lines into France. And the one that's very hard to see on the upper right is of the men after they jumped and landed and take their parachutes off. They're in the grass, they're laying on the ground, and they're trying to find their buddies. Because of all the confusion, it was hard for them to find their buddies. In fact, they were so spread out, the Germans thought there were many more men than there actually were because of all the confusion. So they may not have been near where they planned to jump in, but it created confusion that was good. Then about 4 o'clock, our troops that were on the boats started jumping into their, they called landing crafts. You see the men all bunched up. And you can tell they're going in while the battle was still kind of going on because there's smoke and burning on the beach, on the hills. There's kind of like a cliff that would rise as much as 60 or 70 feet from the beach there, so it would be kind of stiff. And on those hills were trenches and German machine guns and things like that. So a lot of times it was very dangerous for these men. Now here are two pictures even closer to the fighting. The one on the top, you see the smoke drifting through. You see the men that would be released so far out in the water that some would actually drown. Now the bottom picture is one of the few early combat pictures we have. You can tell that it's a combat picture because the men are spread out, they're rushing. The person taking the picture is rushing because it's all jumpy. Some men landed here and their units lost many of them because of the fact that the Germans let them come in a little ways onto the beach and then opened fire. And they weren't just firing with rifles, they had machine guns aimed, and they were calling forth cannons that could fire from several miles back with big, huge explosive shells. There was a lot of casualties. Some got killed before they even got out of the water, and they were trapped. And eventually it took a commander to get some of them moving from one part. They basically pointed out to them, you're getting killed here on the beach, why don't you get up and attack them and get killed inland? Now he didn't really expect them to get killed, he was trying to give them courage to go and fight the Germans. The funny thing is, it worked. What are the Germans doing? Firing. I have read an account of a German soldier who was shooting one of those MG-42 machine guns you see this German soldier at the top holding, and said that he squeezed the trigger so much, so long on that day that his hand got really sore and started cramping up. And you see the quote in red what this German soldier Franz Göckel said about that day. There have been accounts of soldiers that weren't killed that day that were watching the Germans manning those machine guns that would fire and move it back, kind of sweep across the beach, and it kept coming back in the same direction, kind of like playing cat and mouse to see if the guy was going to move. And sometimes they'd actually be shooting at dead bodies because they just wanted to make sure. Eventually, of course, we beat them out. The Germans did counterattack. Rather strong counterattacks in some instances. Put things at jeopardy and chance for a while. One of the units that was part of the counterattack, you see some of them on the left there, the 12th SS. They were the military arm of the people that ran the concentration camps. Hitlerjugend was, well, these soldiers were recruited from the Hitler Youth Group. Stop and think. Would you want an 18-year-old young man to be driving a tank like that you see at the top? Don't know. We did push them back. In this map, you see the little tiny pink how far we'd pushed them on that same day, June 6th. Then you see further in how far we'd pushed them 24 days later on June 30th. Then a little bit farther on July 31st. Then we really started to break out after July 31st, between that up to August 25th. We pushed them way far in. Took a lot of effort, a lot of men sacrificed their lives, but we were pushing them back. All the way back eventually into Germany in defeat. We'd pushed them that 200 miles by the end of August. So the end of World War II in Europe. May 8th, 1945. We kept pushing them, U.S., Great Britain, Canada, Free French, the Soviet Union coming from the other side. And eventually the Germans did surrender on May 8th, 1945. It was given the nickname VE Day, which meant victory in Europe. Now before this happened, the fascist dictators in Europe were starting to die. April 27th, Benito Mussolini was captured by a group of Italians that did not support him, and they executed him the next day. Then Adolf Hitler with the Soviet army fighting above the ground when he was in his underground Führer bunker, where he and some of his top aides stayed supposedly safely. He decided he did not want to die like Mussolini, so he committed suicide in this underground bunker. The underground bunker, he said, remains of it after it was demolished in 1947. There are still pictures you can find of what that place looks like. It's no longer like that, of course, today. Looks kind of like an apartment building and a park and a parking lot. So, the war in Europe was over. The war in the Pacific will be over soon. Stay tuned for further messages and learning in further modules. Go take formative assessment, and that will be all.